Today I want to talk about a seventh chord, and the seventh chord that we're going to look at is the A7 chord. I'd like to talk a little bit about chord spelling. You may be wondering, well, why is it called a seventh chord? The reason a seventh chord is called a seventh chord is that it has 4 notes in it, which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but from a numerical perspective. But it has just 4 notes in it. It has the first degree of a scale, of the major scale, the third, the fifth, and the 7th degree of the scale, actually the lowered 7th degree of the scale. And we'll look at that a little bit more later. Suffice to say, a 7th chord is a 4-note chord. With a flat 7 in it. So that means that when you see a chord written such as A with a 7 after it, it'll be an A chord with what is called a lowered 7th. In the case of an A7 chord, that's a G note. So more on the harmony of that later. But today what we want to accomplish and understand is that an A7 chord and any 7 chord with just the 7 written after it is simply a 4-note chord. A 4-note chord sounds a little bit more complex than a 3-note chord. When you see a chord written such as, A or D or E, when nothing is written after the chord, when it doesn't say A major, D major, E major, it doesn't, because it doesn't have to. It just has to say A, D, or E, and that implies that it is a major chord. An A minor chord has to, or a D minor or an E minor, any minor chord, has to have a small m written after the chord, or maybe another minor designation such as MIN in small letters. And that will tell us that it's a 3-note minor chord. So a major chord is a 3-note chord. A minor chord is a 3-note chord, and a major chord doesn't have to have a designation of major written after it. I hope that was clear. So major chord is a 3-note chord. Minor chord is also a 3-note chord. And will have a sign after it, such as a small m or MIN, designating that it is minor. And a 7 chord is a 4-note chord that has a 7th degree in that chord, and thereby gives it a more complex chord sound. Here is an A7 chord, and I'll name the notes for you. The notes in this chord are A on string 5, E, and here's that G, the 7, and then the C sharp, and then another E in this case. So the sound of this chord . Now, when we're fingering chords, it's easy to get caught up with what our fingers are doing. And I've also often had students who have, they'll play the chord, put down their fingers, and they'll play the chord like, and I won't be hearing the 7th. And so therefore, of course, it's not a 7th chord anymore. It's just an A chord, right? Because they've maybe muted that G note. So whenever you are playing a chord, and in the case of the 7th chord today, when you're playing a 7th chord, make sure that you know where that 7th is. Right? There's the 7th. And you can hear, that is the 7th chord now. Let's take a resolution of that chord. Let's make the A7 chord a 5 chord, which it most often is. So the A7 in this case would want to lead to a D chord. All right, let's do that again. A7. And again, always strike the chord from its root. Let's do that one more time. You could also finger the chord like this with fingers 2 and 3, thereby giving you a guide finger to the D, right? That's sort of clever. See, and there you have a guide finger. With chord changes, it often depends on where the chord is going. The correct fingering is defined by where the chord is going, right? In this case, a correct fingering with an A7 moving to D would really be better the correct fingering would better be defined as fingers 2 and 3, right? Because you've got that common finger. But if you played it with fingers 1 and 2, I mean, that's fine too, except the fingering is not going to be quite as easy with that guide finger, right? So an A7 chord is a 4-note chord using the notes A, C sharp, E, and G. Whenever you form a 7 chord, make sure that you're hearing the 7th. With every chord you play, make sure that you're hearing the sound of the chord you're playing. Don't get caught up in a visual representation of, what my fingers are doing, but instead, what are your ears doing? Are you hearing that 7th? And are you hearing the 7th, resolving or moving forward? Also, just one little final note. Remember that chords obviously are more than two or more notes played together, and so because of that, those notes are moving somewhere. When we move from one chord to another chord, we have movement. So when you're changing from one chord to another, make sure that you're listening for those voices or those notes moving to their new destination. Isn't that cool? That was all exactly the same chord progression, except just defining or emphasizing different notes within the chord. It's all about your ears, and a little bit of understanding too really helps.